Peter Thiel has a net worth of $5.6 billion and is one of Silicon Valley's top investors, famous for his role in companies like Facebook, PayPal, Palantir, SpaceX, and Stripe. And in today's video, I'm going to explain what he looks for when he thinks about what companies to invest in. And to begin, let's talk about definite optimism. Peter's arguably become the world's best talent scout by looking for people who are definite optimists. And it's how he's had such a strong hand in the rise of people like Mark Zuckerberg, Reid Hoffman, and Elon Musk. So what is definite optimism? Thiel thinks there are 4 ways to think about the future: definite optimism, indefinite optimism, definite pessimism, and indefinite pessimism. One axis of this thinking is how much you think about the future. Thiel calls this a definite perspective, where there's a well-defined vision for what the future will look like. And on the other hand, an indefinite world is more like a random walk, where the future is out of our control, just like a lottery. Then there's the optimistic versus pessimistic axis. Do you think the future is going to be better or worse than the past? Will we save humanity from the apocalypse, or will UFO flying aliens destroy the world? Thus, Thiel can draw out 4 quadrants. Definite optimism, which states that the future will be better than the past, and we know how. Indefinite optimism, which says the future will be better, and we don't know how. Definite pessimism, the future will be worse, and we know how. Indefinite pessimism, the future will be worse, and we don't know how. Thiel invests in definite optimists because they have grand visions for the future and a belief that they can make it a reality. Innovation begins with inspiration, and it's the definite optimists who tend to pull the future forward and build billion-dollar companies. Companies like the ones that I mentioned at the beginning of this video: Facebook, PayPal, Palantir, SpaceX, and Stripe. The United States of America's Apollo project is one of my favorite examples of definite optimism. Listen to Thiel talk about it, and you'll hear how he longs for the days when technology alluded to space, airplanes, and rockets that generated more energy than a small atomic bomb. NASA's star-spangled splendor transformed consciousness. Astronauts with stomachs of steel traveled the impossible distances of space. To reach the moon, America's pioneers traveled 240,000 miles. About 58 times the distance Columbus sailed when he discovered the Western world. The Apollo 8 mission required superhuman precision, equivalent in scale to throwing a dart at a peach from a distance of 28 feet and grazing only the top of the fuzz without touching the fruit's skin. As the Apollo rockets pierced through the stratosphere and navigated the pin-drop silence of outer space, they inspired people back on Earth to expand their horizons, and they did so literally. America's imagination peaked in 1969 when Neil Armstrong stepped foot on the moon. He stepped on moon dust less than a decade after Alan Shepard became the first American in space, and only 8 years after President John F. Kennedy's speech at Rice University, where he famously said, "We choose to go to the moon not because it's easy, but because it's hard." Now that is a good story, and an inspiring one too. And it's why America's top physicists, engineers, and politicians were all able to team up to send a squad of astronauts to the moon. By the way, if you want to hear uplifting stories and deep analyses of great thinkers like Peter Thiel, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you can discover my other deep dives. Anyway, back to how much civilians were inspired about the future. Just ask Pan American World Airways, the iconic airline of the post-World War II era. After Americans stepped foot on the moon, the airline's customer service center was inundated with phone calls from around the country. Customers wanted to reserve seats for the first civilian trips to the moon. And between 1968 and 1971, Pan Am accepted more than 93,000 reservations for planned commercial flights to the moon. As the American people watched their comrades explore the distant skies and travel to the moon, they thought they'd witnessed the opening of a new frontier. a new era where humans were no longer trapped on the pale blue dot, and soon all of humanity would traverse the stratosphere and soar through space. Science fiction writers such as Arthur C. Clarke predicted imminent commercial space travel, interstellar exploration, and genuine artificial intelligences. The Apollo project didn't just shake the Florida launch pads, it shook the entire world. And it's an example of the power of stories. When presented with possibilities that stretch the imagination, humanity will drop its usual political infighting in order to create, fund, and strive to make their definite visions come true. And this same thing happens with startups that are driven by powerful visions of shaping the world in a fresh, new way. The Apollo story is one of progress. But what exactly is progress? And how did it become integrated into heroic human stories like technology startups? It turns out forward progress wasn't always the dominant societal worldview. The sociologist Robert Nisbet argued that many ancient cultures saw time as cynical. They assumed that humanity was doomed to cycles of pessimism, destruction, famine, mercy, to the whims of nature and the gods. And if time is cyclical, the future will look like the present. That means that the arrow of time points back towards its origin and where it began. Taken to the extreme, this cycle removes human agency, because no matter what you do, the world will just return to its original state. And likewise, ancient cultures saw time like an endless wheel. They believed that every so often the universe would wind down and burn up, and after this rebirth, history would begin again. And everything from our bodies to our souls would be purified and renewed. Relative to the Christian tradition, which I'm about to talk about, this philosophy assumes the futility of long-term progress. Even if they held ideas of moral, spiritual, and material improvement, the idea of continual improvement of humanity is an invention of Western modern Christian theology, which posits that time is linear, that time starts at the Garden of Eden and marches towards a future of judgment, justice, and an eternal kingdom of God. Christians turned their mind to the supernatural and adopted a belief in redemption and heaven. As that sociologist Nisbet writes, of all the contributions to the idea of progress by Christian thought, none is greater than this Augustinian suggestion of a final period on earth, utopian in character and historically inevitable. It turns out that the Christian linear perspective dates back to Greek philosophy. And controversial at the time, writers like Seneca wrote that mankind had advanced in the past and will continue to advance in the future. But the concept of progress did not crystallize until a Christian writer named Saint Augustine in the year 1470. His book, The City of God, was the first full-blown philosophy of world history, and Augustine fused the Greek idea of growth with the Jewish idea of sacred history. And St. Augustine introduced the Christian linear theory of humanity. In his book, he refers to the 7 stages of early history. The last, still yet to come stage will consist of peace and happiness on earth, he said. He wrote that as a result of the inevitable historical development from the primitive world of the Garden of Eden, those who put their faith in Christ will experience an earthly paradise. St. Augustine believed in the unity of mankind, driven by a fixed destiny, a vision of the future condition of heaven on earth. So beginning with the Greeks, and accelerated by Christian writers such as St. Augustine, Western philosophy is defined by the march toward heavenly perfection. And people in the West now see progress, evolution, and innovation as synonyms. We assume that increased freedom and knowledge is limited only by the passage of time, and an active commitment to building a better future. Like a law of nature, progress was as inevitable as cherry blossoms in the spring. St. Augustine's perspective is the bedrock of Thiel's investing worldview, and he believes that the strongest catalyst towards these utopian visions isn't globalization, it's technology. He's even gone as far as saying, and I quote here, stagnation leads straight to apocalypse. Just like Christians, Thiel rejects the idea of cyclical time. He believes the future can be meaningfully better than the past, and this belief initiates a positive feedback loop. Christians believe that humans are here to reflect God's light onto the world, and instead of returning to the Garden of Eden, humanity will march forward. And at the end of the Old Testament, in Revelations chapter 21, verse 1, it reads, "I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea." In the technologist worldview, there is a new heaven and a new earth to be invented, one with faster delivery, more convenient transportation, more seamless commerce, and yeah, more memes. So let's talk more about how Thiel thinks and invests. To Peter Thiel, short-term thinking is the essence of sin. Like the Bible, he advises us to make plans and sacrifice the present for the future. Greatness is like chess. To win, you must study the endgame and work towards the one you want to see. And Thiel's favorite chess player was Jose Raul Capablanca, who said, "To begin, you must study the end. You don't want to be the first to act. You want to be the last man standing." Thiel says a bad plan is better than no plan at all. That's why he rejects the lean startup philosophy. He thinks iterating with no plan is chaotic and doesn't lead to spectacular successes. He supports people who trade the shiny mirage of short-termism for the calm, controlled grace of a long-time horizon. And like Capablanca, they're the kinds of people who study the endgame and work backwards from there.
We're in the endgame now.
Thiel thinks if we meander around without a sense of progress or with this work with the end in mind perspective, we risk stagnation. Informed by its linear conception of time and the Christian image of heaven, Thiel applauds the grand visions of yesterday's leaders. He's a bit more disappointed in today's modern presidents who no longer inspire Americans with positive visions of the future. See, the visions of the past weren't just more ambitious, they were also clear and specific. And unfortunately, there is no modern equivalent of the Manhattan Project, the Apollo Project, or Nixon's 1974 plan to defeat cancer by the end of the decade. To echo the point, Thiel likes to quote a 1967 best-selling book called The American Challenge. The book predicted that America would be a post-industrial society by the year 2000. Americans would work only 4 days per week and only 7 hours per day. The year would consist of only 39 work weeks and 13 weeks of vacation. Tell that to the Wall Street bankers and McKinsey consultants I talked about in the last video. Thiel's idea of definite optimism is Christian theology cloaked in secular language, a positive vision for the future that unites society and raises our spirits. And Thiel says that that's what great companies, great people, and great societies need to succeed. And no matter the obstacles, with definite optimism, that certainty about the future gives us the confidence to act in the present. And by the way, if you want to learn more about how to act confidently in the face of competition, go watch my first video about Thiel's investing philosophy. In it, I explain an illustrative concept called mimetic theory, which applies to everybody who is hungry, curious, and wants to succeed. As I shared in that video, Thiel wants us to look towards the transcendent instead of just blindly copying other people. And if you want to attract funding, attention, and talent for your company, follow the path of definite optimism and tell the very best story you can.